Good morning, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you all today. So I'm going to be talking about Microsoft's Digital Defense Report, which was issued last week. And in essence, this is our flagship report. So we issue it around this time every year, and it's a look back over the last year, in essence. So what are the top trends? What are we seeing? What does this mean for everybody? Now, the report itself is about 120 pages long. It's really meaty, and I'm going to try and pack that into 30 minutes. And I was looking at the time going, and I got a Q&A as well. So I'm going to go pretty fast, and some of the slides have got a lot of information on it. I'm going to give you the salient points as well, because I sort of said it's a huge amount to cover ultimately. But as we sort of said, make sure you've got questions. If we run out of time for questions, I am going to be here over lunch as well. So we can kind of pick that up from there. But I think the key things that we want to reflect on is just the fact that how the kind of cyber criminals are evolving in terms of their pace, their scale, the use of technologies. I'm going to be reflecting on what are the trends when it comes to cybercrime, nation-state actors. As we sort of said, you can't get around AI, so I do have a whole thing about AI in particular. One of the things that we have identified is the increase of proxy groups, particularly when we're talking about nation-state actors. So me as a state, for example, if I actively target another country, it could be seen as an act of aggression from that respective country. However, if I give the tools and I give the technology and I give the know-how to another affiliated group, let's call them a ransomware operator, as an example, that means that they are free to go ahead and do those attacks, do DDoS attacks, do all the things that the state can't do, which actually means attribution becomes even harder when we're trying to work out who is actually behind these attacks and what's their motivation. But I think it's just a real sign of the times with regards to the fact that a lot of these threat actors, I'm going to talk about it, go into a very specific objectives of what they're doing and how they're doing it in particular. So I just wanted to kind of first of all reflect on, this is again, it's one of those busy slides, but it's just giving you context with regards to where some of the data is coming from. So you've probably heard that Microsoft collects and processes over 78 trillion telemetry signals a day. Now that is coming from the entirety of the Microsoft cloud as anything which is attached, not attacked, to our network. So it's every authentication, every email, every LinkedIn, Bing, GitHub, Xbox, all of those things combined. So how do you make sense of 78 trillion signals? We use huge amounts of machine learning, huge amounts of data analytics, and we're really trying to understand what's new, what's different. As I sort of said, how are those threat actors are evolving? Big number I just wanted to highlight is the number of actively tracked threat actors has gone up to 1,500. 600 of those are nation-state actors. So when you're thinking about nations, as we sort of said, a lot of those have got very specific objectives and multiple subgroups within that kind of state. Now, this time last year, we were actively tracking 300. So you can kind of see the scope and scale of what we're talking about. There are multiple teams that kind of come in together with regards to data analytics, it's data scientists. We've got multiple teams working across the globe to really try and move as fast as possible. So to kind of kick things off, I've got three kind of core areas, if you like. So I'm going to be looking at what's evolving from cybercrime, nation-state actors, before we're going to go into the AI, and then it's into the kind of the so what. I think the big news, in essence, is identity has overtaken endpoints as the primary attack vector by some mile. So we have seen a 10-fold increase in password sprays in particular. So when we're thinking about what is their objective, what's their target, identity. And I think this time last year I did an event for Kocho as well, and we said we're going to die on our sword when we talk about how important MFA is, and it still is. But they've learned how to bypass it. They've learned how to kind of think about all of the different controls and all the things that they need to do. And so social engineering in particular is making a revival. So as the technology gets better and better at identifying anomalies, we've got extended detection and response. So you can kind of track, you can see the attack surface, where it's coming from, what are they doing. And therefore they're kind of going backwards into social engineering is a kind of a primary attack surface, as we sort of said. So just to put that into perspective, we are probably tracking 350 million password spray attacks a day. And that is out of 600 million attacks. So what is their primary focus? So last month, this is not in the digital defense report, I kind of added this one in. 50% of all attacks in August were against cloud identity. So from a threat actor's perspective, when we're talking about identity, cloud identity is the crown jewels as far as they're concerned. Because as much as we talk about network segmentation, as much as we talk about privileged access management, we still find that ultimately the same admin, particularly global admin, not only opens the door to a tenant, it potentially opens the door to multi-clouds, but also dependent on how you've configured it, you can also pivot maybe from on-premise to the cloud and multi-cloud environment. So from their perspective, getting cloud identity is number one target against all other identities. That being said, they don't particularly care, because if they find an identity, it's not really useful to them. As we said, I'm going to give it to a proxy group. So yes, I can kind of sell it on the dark web. I can kind of do various different things with access brokers, but I don't know if that's actually going to be used against me. So I want to be really targeted with what we're doing. So fraud trends in terms of phishing, so URLs, links, still over 50% of those. We've seen a huge increase in QR codes. I think the interesting thing about QR codes, it's actually very hard to track the kind of what comes next. So the QR code might come through a corporate email, but people are going to use their device, their mobile phone, to actually scan it. So it's luck of the draw whether it's a corporate device running any security software, or it's their own device, because they're just going to pick up a phone, they're going to scan it, and then we've kind of got two different devices that are running this attack in essence, depending on what they're trying to do. So attachments is still kind of up there. 775 million emails contain some kind of malware. I think it's interesting when we talk about sanctioned versus unsanctioned applications, particularly different SaaS services, different, they're kind of really favouring some of the really popular tools that are more likely not to get blocked by you or any other sort of service provider. And so in essence, you're then confusing between what is legitimate use and what is malicious use. And that's kind of what they're relying on. So when you've got these kind of applications, these email service providers, whatever the case may be, they kind of then, you can't tell the difference maybe where this traffic is coming from, how it's being utilized. And so they really are kind of thinking about, how do I utilize this for my own advantage? And they do favour the tried and tested, particularly when we're thinking about phishing still tops the list ultimately with their game plan and how they're trying to gain access, but they're constantly experimenting, as we'll talk about. So business email compromise is quite interesting. So it's still the most financially impacting cybercrime of all. It's actually really hard when it kind of comes to ransomware and how they actually achieve their objective, which I'm going to come back to. Now, it used to be that they used to have an auto-forwarding rule in email. In particular, they would have keywords and they would then forward that email out of the organization to themselves. Now, as a result of that, Microsoft actually turned off the auto-forwarding rule. So it actually requires an admin to give that user permission to put it back on. So they found a way around that. So in essence, I was still using keywords. I'm still looking for specific things, emails that I'm looking for. But instead of auto-forwarding it out, I'm forwarding it into a different file on your own inbox, in essence. So you might have drafts deleted. You might have some folders that you don't particularly use anymore. And so in essence, I'm just parking them over there. So you don't even see the email coming in. So you don't even see the conversation. You can just, they've parked it, they're looking at it over there, and that means you're never really part of what's kind of going on. Their objective is still to laterally move, potentially, because sometimes, as we said, it's luck of the draw, who they've got access to. So they may have spearphished the identity of that particular individual, but when they're thinking about who's who, what is my ultimate game, in terms of, am I exfiltrating data? Am I trying to get cash? Am I trying to move money? What is it I'm trying to do? So the particular user that I have might not have the permissions that I need, and so I need to kind of go through the organization. I need to get them to get ultimately the prize. So I'm still having to get that person to do stuff. I'm still having to trick them into performing illicit actions. And then part of that, once they've moved the conversation into a different mailbox, they then hijack the conversation. And this is potentially where they can overtake the conversation because you have no idea what's going on. You never see that email chain again. So they can start to change the conversation, change the actions, or even create a different mailbox account, which they then flip over. And because it's an automatically a known conversation between either somebody in the company, somebody external, it's a supply chain, whatever the case may be, they just think it's a continuation of whatever they've already started. So probably wouldn't say, something's changed, last minute alteration. We've had a change in project, change in plans, whatever, make this change now. And so they're probably not really questioning it because they've already had that instruction, they've already had that conversation, and it's what they're expecting. So we talked about MFA, this is how they're bypassing in essence. So they're really trying to then, once they're in the account, how can I register a new device? How do I change that device? And so actually what they're trying to do is maintain a foothold. So even when your detections might start, this is changing behavior, something's different, something's a bit strange. So I've already registered a device. So in essence, I need to retain a foothold and not be kicked out. And so this is really a change in tactics. And every time we kind of bring some countermeasure it, they're thinking about something else. So one of those big targets is, in essence, they are really trying to impersonate IT. I'm going to come back to IT in particular when it comes to nation-state actors. But again, part of that, I need to change the password, I need to enroll a device, I need to do various different actions. And so to counter this, we've seen a lot of help desks who are now insisting on face-to-face verification and various other tactics and techniques to make sure that I 100% know that A, it's a human, and B, it's a human I was expecting in terms of changing those sort of things over. Now, a lot of them are pretending to be Microsoft, Apple, tech support. So in essence, who trusted brands, we've seen a huge increase just in July in terms of impersonating not just Microsoft, but also CrowdStrike, trying to then go to different customers to say, I have a fix, download this, I'm going to help you restore your services. In essence, all it's doing is downloading more malware. It's downloading a backdoor access. I might even use Quick Assist to gain access directly onto that user's device. And again, under the pretext, I'm helping them to restore services or downloading additional software to make sure that this incident kind of doesn't happen again. And ultimately, every time that they're trying to download software, they're trying to get that person to take action, they're collecting more and more information. So they're constantly scraping credentials. They're constantly scraping any information they can possibly get hold of. Some of this, as we said, is for access brokers. Some of that is just, can I sell it to the highest bidder on the dark web, or can I use it for my own purposes? And so when we kind of come to ransomware, I think there's potentially some good news here. So yes, we have seen a 2.75% increase in human-operated ransomware. 92% of successful attacks start with some kind of unmanaged device. So when we're talking exactly what we just said in terms of the QR codes or anything like that, it's trying to elicit some backdoor access. They've enrolled another device. Obviously, that device is also non-managed at all. However, as I said, good news, though we've seen an increase in ransomware encounters, the success rate of those is dropping quite significantly. And that comes back to, again, is actually having that extended detection response, actually understanding the attack chain and taking evasive action. So to counteract that, they're kind of foregoing the initial encryption because it's really, really hard to not only get an admin with the right privileges, make all the changes in your environment. Well, hopefully you've not even noticed that, and exfiltrate data and then give you a ransom demand. So in essence, they're going straight for data exfiltration. So they are speeding up their attack. So we have seen some threat in and out within 15 minutes. And that is because the access brokers have already done the hard work, they've already got the credentials, they've assessed the credentials, and now I'm giving you a guarantee that when you pull the plug, it's absolutely going to work. So it's fast and furious, I'd say, when it kind of comes to ransomware operators, when they're having to, as I say, get in and out really quickly. Now, give a hazarded guess, most of your security operations SLAs probably also 15 minutes. So the time you actually detect an alert, you've either triaged it, you've automated something, or you've passed it on to the next team, they're already out. So this is something to be mindful of. So there is some good news with regards to the deployment of technology. However, as we said, they're always countering it. I'm going to flip to nation-state actors in particular. Now, this is quite a busy slide. I'm not expecting you to read all of it, but in terms of who we track, how we track, and looking at different areas, it's probably not going to surprise you. When we look at who are the most attacked countries in different regions, they follow a pattern. With regards to geopolitical risk, geopolitical conflicts, and so who they're attacking and why really says something quite considerable. Now, spoiler alert, US always comes in at number one. I have to say, it doesn't matter who the threat actor is potentially, particularly nation-state actors. Probably wouldn't surprise you, Middle East is Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and then we've gone into South Africa. So you might not be able to see, you might be able to see from some of the screens, but UK, when we look at Europe, is number 2. So UK normally comes in at 3 to 5 globally, and that is because of our relationship with the US within the Five Eyes intelligence, NATO, and others. So who are their prime targets? Now, what you can see is a quarter of all nation-state attacks are hitting IT service providers for the very reason that I said before. They have privileged access. And so in essence, when you're thinking about outsourcing servers, it's managed security, it's cloud, it's any one of those things, it's really hard for me to kind of break your network through the front door. So what I'm trying to do is break it through the back door and go and hitting IT service providers in particular. And they've really kind of figured out that a lot of people potentially aren't monitoring to the same degree, or they're not shutting down access. So you might have been utilizing this third party for a very specific project, specific program, or they're continually providing some support. Who is actually auditing that and tracking that and checking all the privileges and what they're doing? Is it you or is it them? But they are really dependent on the gaps that exist in whatever strategy you've deployed. So number 2, education and research. This is from 2 different perspectives. Education, because they can actually, again, scrape as many credentials as possible, see how many doors that open. But the research itself, particularly from prestigious universities, is a high value target for many nation-state actors in particular. So I'm going to give you a little flavor for some of these. I'm going to start with Russia, who we now refer to as Blizzard. So we went for a whole taxonomy change last year. We used to refer to nation-state actors after elements on the periodic table. We ran out of elements. As I sort of said, there are not 600 of them. So we've had to kind of go through, it's quite confusing. Blizzard is Russia. And so we kind of think of who are they after? So 75% of all their targets are focusing still on Ukraine, NATO, supporting their war efforts. And so government is number 1 target in terms of policy, because they really want to know how invested is the UK, how invested is the US, how invested is the rest of Europe to continue this war, to continue to support Ukraine. Because at some point, someone's probably going to turn around and say, we're done now, or we're going to get pushback from our own citizens, and that's kind of what they're waiting for. And they are willing to play the long game. A lot of nation-state actors are, and so they kind of sit back and wait, in essence. But the interesting thing, they sort of Midnight Blizzard, so the threat actor used to be known as Nibelium, is also the threat actor behind SolarWinds, is also the same threat actor that attacked Microsoft itself earlier this year. Now, when I talk about these nation-state actors having very specific objectives, and they're very true to the objective as well. So Midnight Blizzard, in terms of why they attacked Microsoft, they were actually looking for intelligence about themselves, which is actually quite telling. So what is it you think we know? What is it you think we don't know? Are you about to change your modus operandi? So the war didn't have the desired effect. They thought this was going to end very, very quickly. They went really hard, really fast on the number of cyber attacks that they hit Ukraine. So we saw more cyber attacks in the first 4 months than the previous 8 years. And that means that the military intelligence, they have to regroup, they have to kind of work out what they're going to do next. So it's quite telling, as I sort of said, not just the method of attack, but why they're attacking. And I think it's really important for us to kind of really question on some of that why. So China is what we now refer to as Typhoon. Again, IT topping the list with regards to who they're trying to target and why. Education and research, highly targeting of Taiwan, highly targeting of US defense in particular, and kind of any countries that really are supporting those areas in particular. But I think China have always been very true to what they're doing and why they're doing it. It's all about furthering their interests, particularly when it comes to science, medicine, tech, learning about AI. Because if I can't build it, I'm going to steal it, in essence. So Sandstorm, is what we refer to as Iran. Nearly half of their attacks in the last year have all been against Israel. But you can kind of see education and research actually goes above IT, but they're also really interested in tracking dissidents, journalists, human rights activists, even their own people as well. And I think that really shows you kind of the culture potentially of Iran and their kind of focus areas. But it's all around, really expanding their influence operations. So we have actually seen Iran and Russia working with each other in terms of amplifying specific news. And so you've probably noticed that what's going on in Ukraine has kind of dulled down a bit in the media, and all the focus has been on Israel in particular. Some of that has been done on purpose in terms of, like I say, amplifying the news in different countries and different areas to reinforce their narrative, in essence. So again, I think it's important that we kind of say not all of these nations are not necessarily working in isolation. Some of them are working as a collective, which also means our job gets even harder when we're trying to attribute and we're talking about those sort of proxy groups and how they operate in particular. So SLEET is what we refer to as North Korea. Again, very specific. If you say 44% of their targeting is at IT in particular. UK is coming in at number 2 against US with regards to their targeting. What we have seen, I think North Korea is, again, always kind of being true to their objective when it comes to data, understanding military, defense, furthering their regime and nuclear and various different things. So they're heavily, heavily targeted, very specific in who. But they've also been wanting to steal cash, either physical cash or crypto or whatever. We identified a new threat actor that's come from North Korea called Moonstone Sleet. Now, we thought it was a subset of a group, but it actually, with their objective and kind of what they're doing, again, they're very specific in their targeting and what they're doing. And what's been interesting is we've never seen a ransom coming from a nation-state actor before. As we saw, they tend to use proxy groups. But as North Korea kind of used to stealing money anyway, they're trying to think, I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. So as well as exfiltrating data from their particular target, they also ransom it at the same time to collect money. So that's a real change in tactic with regards to what we've seen. It's not usual, as we said, from a nation-state actor to do that. They pretend to use those proxy groups. So AI, I can't have a presentation without something to do with AI, can we? So kind of key insights, there's 2 kind of different things to consider with regards to not just building the AI, but testing it, which is really, really hard, particularly red teaming from a security perspective is completely different to how you might red team a normal software parameter, because it's still software, but the parameters have changed. In terms of testing for those unintended consequences, how do I test and how do I determine what is normal input or normal output? What am I expecting? So there's a lot of challenges when it kind of comes to that. And then I think the real problem is, as well, is, as we sort of said, is you ask the same thing over and over again, you're going to get a different response. And a lot of the threat actors are really playing to this with those prompt injections with regards to trying to get the system, in essence, to break its own controls or break its own programming. And they're looking for loopholes. They're constantly looking for vulnerabilities. How is it being trained? What is the question I need to ask to get it to give up that information in particular? Now, I think the interesting thing as well is we're so used to threat actors socially engineering humans, they're now trying to figure out how to socially engineer a machine. And that is the real difference with those things. So some of the real emerging trends is the system compromise itself, so the back end, how it's being programmed, that the actual AI model itself is a high-value target for many threat actors, either trying to reverse engineer it, understand how I put malware into it, how do I exfiltrate data, how do I reverse engineer it, how do I understand its outputs, or I just steal it. And so there's also an over-reliance on AI as it gets more and more embedded into different business processes, and people don't necessarily know where it's an AI or where it's a human. And therefore it becomes an issue when you find some of these issues are unintended. Trying to take it out of the business process is actually going to become very hard in itself. But I think really with regards to some of the threat actors and how they're evolving, we've seen impersonation, so use of deep fakes, audio, visual, deep fakes, in particular content production, harmful content as well, that's being pumped out over social media with a very specific objective when it comes to disinformation campaigns. Nefarious knowledge acquisition, really undoing their reconnaissance. So I'm going to talk a little bit more around some of that. The cyber threat amplification I'm going to come back to as well, because I really wanted to talk about some of those nation-state actors in particular and how they are using those AI models, but also the actions that Microsoft is taking as a result. The direct and indirect social attacks is then really looking at the language, the translations that they have to use when it comes to spear phishing campaigns, to kind of bring that to life and how they're utilizing it. So there's quite a busy slide. But in essence, spear phishing campaigns are utilizing the AI to make sure that they're highly precision targeting on the individuals. So how do I know 100% that the person that I'm targeting is the actual person? And so they're utilizing the AI to do identification checks, whether that's a visual check, audio check, whatever the case. And so you can kind of sort of see that they're able to kind of remotely turn on maybe some cameras, listen, as you saw, listen to the voice. And sometimes the AI only needs about 3 seconds of a voice to verify the actual target and actual human behind it. And so a lot of this, therefore, then becomes the AI is utilizing it, as I say, not just the reconnaissance, but high precision targeting. We've seen a huge increase when it comes to fake job adverts. And this is, again, a sign of the times that if I can't break you from the outside, I'm going to try and get someone employed into your organization from the inside. And so part of that is then looking at tools like LinkedIn, for example, the different jobs, the different adverts, what are people putting out there? What is a must-have in terms of the technology that they need to have, the skill sets? And so they're mirroring it. And so they're trying to create a perfect candidate. And so when you're kind of going through the first round of, you might even be using AI itself to do some automatic filtering. And so if I'm trying to make sure that the person that I'm trying to get into your organization is the perfect candidate that's going to get through all of the first round, second round, third round, whatever the case is required. And so ultimately it's making sure that the person they want to be employed is the person who actually does become employed. And so I think this is something to be really mindful about how they're able to scale, how they're able to do some of those things. Now, if I talk about just some of the threat actors and nation states across the top and how they've been utilizing Gen AI, how they've been experimenting. So Forest Blizzard are part of military, so they're part of the GRU. And so part of what they've been doing is using using AI models to do reconnaissance, with regards to understanding satellite imaging, satellite communications, gives you kind of a little bit of an insight into the intent of what's coming. with regards to their next attack or how they're going to knock out communications, not just for Ukraine, but maybe other countries at the same time. So Emerald Sleep, North Korea, really again focusing on their nuclear regime, who's who, active spear phishing campaigns against specific individuals as a result. Crimson Sandstorm, so they even use the large language models not only to do reconnaissance, as we said, they're not very well known for their human rights, and so they were actively making new websites to attract feminists to this website so they gain information about who's who and they can actually profile and surveil their own people. So it kind of gives you an insight, again, of what are they thinking about. And then China is actually utilizing the large language models to do translations. But all of those as well combined are utilizing the large language models to understand vulnerabilities, understand operating systems, understand how do I obfuscate what I'm doing, how do I hide in plain sight, because a lot of their objectives is to retain access. They're not in and out. I need access to data as much as possible, and I need to go invisible. Now, the interesting thing about Salmon Typhoon in particular, when they actually went and asked the AI model to create malicious malware, it actually blocked them. So the safety rails did its job. So yes, you can use the AI model to refine code, but you cannot specifically ask it to create malware or to do nefarious actions. And so that's why they're trying to bend it to figure out what I can do. Now, the good news of all four of those, Microsoft has already taken evasive action to shut their access down. And so we're working with a lot of the AI tech providers, and we're sharing information. But again, it gives us a sign for what they're utilizing it for, what countermeasures we need in response. And so part of not just disrupting normal cyber attacks or normal cyber influence operations, we also have to disrupt what they're doing with these AI models and then learning from it and then putting those safety rails back into play. Now then, the flip side of that is how do you use AI for defense in particular? Now really this is utilizing the AI in reverse. So if you're utilizing the AI to refine language and to translate and to make sure I understand the dialect, so it's not just the fact that I need it to be English, I need it to understand what the Mancunian or Liverpudlian dialect is very, very different from, say, somebody in London. And so we can actually use advanced linguistics to detect that, to detect changes in language, changes in behavior, where they're still trying to use that language to entice someone to take action. We can also utilize those large language models to go across huge data sets to look for those patterns, but also look for methods of how they would obfuscate. What are the things that we need to do to detect and respond and identify as well? And the attack disruption doesn't change ultimately. So we're still having to isolate machines, we're still having to isolate networks, we're still having to compromise those accounts. But AI is really kind of transforming from a defense perspective. What are we doing and how we're thinking about some of these things. And just to give you a little bit of a perspective, so Microsoft, one of the things that we have to do is Patch Tuesday. We've been doing Patch Tuesday for 20 years. So anyone can come to Microsoft with a vulnerability, whether it's in Azure, at Office, whatever the case. So industry standard, believe it or not, is 90 days for someone to report a vulnerability, for us to reverse engineer it, understand what it does, what it's connected to, what's its ultimate aim. We then have to create a patch, test the patch, deploy the patch. That's 90 days. So we have committed to do that in 45 days, which means we're critically dependent on AI to help speed that up. And it is actually reverse engineering malware. That used to be a very manual process that was done by a lot of our data scientists and threat analysts to kind of really understand how this malware works. So we are putting the AI to use at some scale. So just to kind of flip that into, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean to all of us? Now, I mentioned Midnight Blizzard, who is a very aggressive threat actor, very specific objective. We also had another threat actor called Storm 0558, a Chinese threat actor, that tried to gain access into Microsoft's public cloud. Again, very specific objective to gain access into the US federal government and some other governments. As a result of that, last November, we issued the Secure Future Initiative. This is a multi-year program. It's probably the biggest cyber security engineering program in history. We've got 34,000 engineers working on this. So part of that is how we think about identity. How do we think about engineering? How do we think about code? And this is a ground up for the whole of Microsoft. So this is not just about the tools and technology that we sell in terms of Defender, Entra, and Sentinel, for example. It is actually the underpinning everything of the cloud. So you might not be able to kind of see some of this, but I just want to highlight some kind of key things with regards to, again, lessons learned. So when we think about tech debt, for example, our tech debt is probably on another scale to most other companies. We have to run faster than all of our customers, partners combined, because of the threat actors, because of regulations, because of whatever's coming. And so it's not unusual for us, therefore, to have a huge amount of DevOps and engineers and project engineers who are spinning up VMs, spinning up projects all over the place, test this, download software, do all the things. That meant that we've ended up with 5.75 million tenants or unused tenants. And people were like, how? What? How? And as I sort of said, so we've realized that any one of these that can be utilized as a potential backdoor, and that's really going to how some of these threat actors were able to take control. So we've also removed 730,000 applications. And that means that we've actually changed when it comes to those developers and the engineers and all of these people working on these programs is we've actually changed their ability to have any control over their admin access. They cannot change it, they cannot override it. Every time they spin something up, all security controls come on, all monitoring comes on, irrespective if it's a test or dev environment. And so you're going to hear more of this. We have actively said that we're going to publish our lessons learned. What does this mean? How did we, Microsoft, how did you actually identify all of those tenants? How did you identify all of those applications? And how did you shut it down without any impact to the business? How have you maintained access to the public cloud? How have you got all of these things in play without dropping any element? So we created this. This is new. This is kind of the hierarchical of needs, if you like. So if you think about as humans, we have basic needs. We need food, water, shelter, same principle. So in essence, what we said is you absolutely need to protect identities. Number one, doesn't matter who you are, what size company you are. Then you'll see endpoints comes in at number two. I think it used to be the other way around. It used to be endpoints first, but we're so basically identity has to come first no matter what. And then it's really then kind of comes down to understanding those assets, understanding the data. How do you protect? How do you respond as quickly as possible? And we've really kind of put in this kind of integration of AI into that. As much as you can automate, the better, in essence. And so one of the things that Microsoft is committed to, we have stated we want to eliminate all tier one analysts. And that doesn't mean that we're going to make them suddenly redundant. We're just going to automate the role of a tier one analyst through AI and various other means, so that all of the tier one moves up to tier two, tier three move up, and we go to active threat hunting. We have created a new team called GHOST, which is, get my acronym right, Global Hunting Oversight of Security Threats. Their only job is to hunt. That's it. So there is no incident response in there. They are looking at IOCs. They're going back across every single environment, forward across every environment, looking for those smallest changes. Has there been any change at all? How do we detect it? How do we respond? And so the key thing that we've identified really is the fact that the objective doesn't change from these threat actors. I need access, I need data. How they do it is just another change in their methodology. But ultimately, this really comes down to understanding those critical assets, understanding the exposure, the vulnerabilities, and shut them down. No matter, and we kind of know this, we've been talking in security for a very long time. And just a kind of reflection on the OT as well. So Microsoft itself has a huge amount of physical infrastructure. We have 300 data centers. We've committed to build another 500 data centers. We have over 350,000 miles of fiber and subsea cables, which means we have a huge amount of operational technology in terms of power, heating, ventilation, monitoring. So what we've learned from testing and managing our own physical security as much as our IT security is it kind of really comes down to modern authentication, having that visibility end to end. Config management, really hard, I know, for a lot of people, but having that inventory, knowing exactly what's attached to your network, how any changes in any of that really means that you have to have that visibility. So just to give you some very last perspectives, so lessons learned from DART, if you're familiar with them, this is our team, in essence, that if you kind of come to Microsoft and say, Microsoft, I'm in the middle of an active cyber attack, I need your help. Our DART team, in essence, they are the ones who are going to come to you and give you that assistance. Some real lessons learned, probably doesn't really surprise you, I guess, a little bit. Kind of comes down to the same issues when it comes to crisis management. It's the preparation. Again, really understanding what are the crown jewels, where are they, having those playbooks and making sure that any bit that's automated in terms of shutting down the network, shutting down devices, shutting down users, that your people actually know that's what's going to happen, because it's going to come as a shock to them the more that we automate. But tailoring communications, we see a lot of focus around testing or security operation incident response, not necessarily the exec incident response, which is really important. But it's really, again, where's that data coming from? Getting those data insights and making a decision really, really fast based on what it's telling you. And part of that as well is what we really find is a lot of companies don't go to the next level, which is recovery. Now, one of the things that we sort of tell a lot of customers is the initial part of any ransomware cyber attack is containment. Our objective is to give you back identity ASAP so that you have control, you can kind of see what's going on. The problem is you can no longer trust your environment. You don't know what they've done, you don't know where they've left back doors, you don't know what configuration changes you've made. And so part of your strategy and plan needs to be a full rebuild of your operating system, which you probably are having kittens about. Just even contemplating that is the reality of incident response, and that's kind of the things that you need to think about as well. So just to end, before we go to questions, I'm not sure how we're doing, but in essence, I've talked a lot about the current threat, how that's evolving with AI. I haven't even mentioned quantum. And so I reckon this time next year when I come back and I give you this presentation, we'd have moved on quite substantially. But it's really important, therefore, we're not just thinking about today's threats, we're thinking about how this is going to continue to evolve over the years, and how these threat actors are becoming more aggressive, how they're willing to utilize these tools, not just for disruption, but also destruction at the same time. So it's really important, all of us, kind of understanding this threat landscape. What does it actually mean? And what does it mean in return in terms of our current processes and how we're thinking about evolving technology end to end?